on Daf Chaf Hey Amud Bet. Today's daf is Chaf Vav 26. So, and of course, as always, we're doing it from the Koren Talmud Bavli, the unauthorized, unapproved, and unfettered and clear explanation of Rabbi Steinsaltz's masterful interpretation of the Talmud for the modern world. Brought to you by Cinnamon. Take the cinnamon challenge. Here we go. You see, when you learn Torah, you can have superpowers like being able to eat a spoonful of cinnamon, which for some reason they get about 9 million hits. Daf Yomi gets about 10, maybe 20. Okay, well, we're looking for quality here, not quantity. Okay, kids, hold on to your socks. I'm going to knock them off. Knock your socks off. We're talking about number 1 and number 2 in reading the Shema. A fascinating subject that the Gemara discusses for many pages. It's an important issue. It's a very important issue. Back then they didn't have bathrooms. They didn't have flush toilets. What did we have back then? We had chamber pots. We had outhouses. Okay, so it's very important to have a clean environment. Nowadays everybody's so hung up on clean, it's like, okay, the one thing you walk away from this shir knowing is you're not allowed to daven in the bathroom. You shouldn't even think about Torah in the bathroom, which is something that is quite hard for Torah scholars. But let's get into the meat of the matter, and we're gonna zip along. Going to be very little addition. I'm mostly just reading from the translation of Rabbi Steinsaltz's masterful commentary. A dilemma was raised before the students at the yeshiva. How does Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel state this halacha? What did he mean? Did he mean that the chamber pot is achar hamitah, behind the bed? Lifnei habita, achar hamitah koren miyad. If it's behind the bed, he recites Shema immediately. Lifnei hamitah marchik arba amot of koreh. If it's before the bed, he distances himself 4 cubits and recites. Is that the way he said it? Question mark? Exclamation point. Or perhaps he said it like this. La'achar hamita marchik arba amot v'koreh lifnei hamita eno koreh klal. Is that the way he said it? So we have so we're not sure how Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said it. He might have said it that if it's the chamber pot's behind the bed, he can read Shema immediately, and if it is before the bed, then he has to step 4 dalet away from it. Perhaps this was a covered chamber pot. We're assuming that there's no smell. Or perhaps he said that the other way, that it's behind the bed, he distances himself 4 cubits, and if it's in front of the bed, or the way he says, translate here, is before the bed, lifnei hamita, literally, same difference, then he can't read it at all. So there's one opinion is stricter, and one opinion is more lenient. The first opinion is more lenient. Tashma de Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer achar hamita koreh miyad. Achar hamita koreh miyad lifnei hamita marchik arba amot. In order to resolve this dilemma, the Gemara cites a proof. We have some tashmas to try to prove what's true. Come and hear, as it was taught in the Braita. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, if it is behind the bed, he recites Shema immediately. Before the bed, he distances himself 4 cubits. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, afilu bayit mal mea ama, lo yikra ad sheyotziem o shanichem tachat mitah. So let's say you're down in Florida in the villa, and you got 100 cubit long house, got 1 million rooms, or maybe one giant loft space in the Lower East Side or Harlem or something like that. Even if it's 100 amas, you can't say the Shema until the chamber pot is removed. Thus we see from this Braita that if the vessel is obstructed by the bed, he may recite the Hear, O Israel immediately. Okay, so what do we have here? we just had a few opinions, and there's a contradiction between two Breitas expressing the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. The first opinion we heard earlier. The second opinion we hear that he says, no, you totally have to remove it from the house. The first opinion was, there's a way to say Shema if it's covered up, if it's behind the bed, etc. So, the Gemara asks this very question. Bayan ifshitalan. The Gemara notes, our dilemma has been resolved. But the Breitot contradict each other. Matniyata kashen ahadide. Ipuch batraita. So reverse the second opinion. And say the names of the Tanaim were to the wrong opinions. Meaning that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel didn't say about the house 100 amma long room or 100 amma long house. He says that's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said that, and then we don't have a problem. The solution is difficult. What did you see that led you? What did you see that led you to reverse the latter Braita? Reverse the first one. Man shemat le'damar kule bayat ba'arba amot dame. Rabban Shimon ben Elazar he. The Gemara proves that the latter Braita should be reversed in accordance with the opinions expressed by the sages in general. Would you hear that said, who did, I have to learn how to read English here. Oh, it's going to go back to first grade reading class, get to the reading truck, go down on the street in 72nd Street, and they got the reading mobile to teach inner city kids like me or outer city kids like me who never actually learned how to read a book. So the book I chose to learn how to read is the Talmud, the 20-volume compendium on Jewish law. I figure if I could read that, I could read anything. And it's true. If you can read the Talmud, you can read anything. Talmud, it's not just reading, it's learning. It's putting your mind into it and breaking your mind on it. You have to remember things. You have to use your intellectual abilities to compare and contrast and examine the truth at all costs. Well, not at the cost of your life, but only in extreme cases like Rabbi Akiva would he examine the truth at all costs. Us simple folk, you should never know from such gezerot. Back to the subject at hand. Again, back to number 2. So, the Gemara proves that the latter Braita should be reversed in accordance with the opinions expressed by these sages in general. Who did you hear that said that an entire house is considered like 4 cubits? Who would ever say such a thing? The whole house is 4 cubits? Is it possible for one to say such a thing? A 2 square meter, you have a 100 square meter house, it's the equivalent of 2 square meters, or roughly 4 cubits, 4 ammas? That's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar who expressed that opinion of Eruv. In Eruv, there's a valid halachic opinion in Eruv, brought by Rav Nisim. I think he's mentioning the Ran, that according to the Ran, in the laws of Eruvin, even if the a house is 100 cubits, it's considered like 4 dalet amas in terms of the laws of Eruvin. I don't know the reference to this. I saw it 7 years ago, and if I remember it, I'm not a genius, so okay. So if you're not a genius, why are you teaching Daf Yomi on YouTube? Well, I'm 5 points below, so okay. Anyhow, so Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says 4 cubits is like 100 cubits. So even if you're 196 cubits away from the chamber pot, it's still going to disqualify you from being able to say the Kriyat Shema. Amar Rav Yosef, Bayamine merav Huna, mita pachot mishlosha pshita lan dilechalavu dame. Rav Yosef said, I raised the dilemma before Rav Huna. It is obvious to me that a bed under which there is a space of less than 3 handbreadths is considered lavud, connected to the ground, as if the void beneath it doesn't even exist. As halacha considers a void of less than 3 handsbreadths, 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potatoes, up to here, Okay, that's 3 handbreadths. If it's less than that high, the space under your bed is less than that high, then it's as if there's no space there whatsoever. So then what's the dilemma? What's the question even? The chamber pot is there and it's under 3 handbreadths. It's as if it's not there. And again, we're assuming that we don't have a bad smell. There's no smell at all. Happens to be a sealed container of feces or urine. Can you pray next to that? Let's say you have nowhere else to pray. What's the law? You can't pray in the bathroom. That's like a chamber pot. What if it was closed? It's under. What if you have a very small toilet? You go to your house of somebody who's a very small person, perhaps a hobbit, and he has a tiny little toilet, and it's under 3 cubits, and you're in the bathroom, and it's completely closed, and there's no smell whatsoever. Maybe then you could pray in the bathroom? I don't know. Only in a very extreme circumstance, but I would consult with your local halachic authority before attempting such a hobbit bathroom prayer. Anyhow, so what is if it's lavud? It's connected. There's less than 3 handbreadths of space under the bed. What's the law? Shlosha, Arba'a, Chamisha, Shisha, Shiva, Shmona, Tisha, Mahu. What is the halach of the spaces 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 handbreadths? Amarle, lo yadana. What I love about the sages of the Talmud is if they don't know, they say, I don't know. He answered them and said, Ich weiß nicht, I don't know. So, however, with regard to a space greater than 10 handbreadths, asara, vadai lo mibayali. I certainly have no dilemma. It's clear that a space is considered as a separate domain. We're talking about under the bed, and if it's not, here's the law, sorry, it's not a separate domain if it's less than 3 handbreadths. Then it's considered lavud, meaning it's connected to the rest of the domain, the rest of the areas. It's like it's a regular part of the room, like any other part of the room. If there's a space under 3 handbreadths under the bed. For instance, here's my bed. It's a messy bed, I know. Oh, and what do we see under there? Look at that. It's a chamber pot. Well, not really. We have a modern Persian bathroom, but if there happened to be a chamber pot stuck under there, could I pray in here? Could I pray in here anywhere? The place is such a mess. I mean, look at all that stuff on the floor. Okay. So I think just because there's books strewn about the room does not disqualify a room for prayer. Oh, you can't see me. Oh, better that way. Oh. Okay. So, here I am, dwarfed by my books. Aren't we all? Okay, back to the question at hand. So maybe you could ask a question about 7 handbreadths, 8 handbreadths. Maybe that constitutes that it's not a separate domain? If it's 10 handbreadths, it's a separate domain. Now, I don't visualize this. We have a bed that's, let's say the bed is this huge space underneath it. Sometimes people have a bed, they have a desk under their bed in like a kid's room, and the bed is up high. Now, why would that, just because it's 10 handbreadths or more high, why would that be considered a separate domain? It seems to be connected very well to the rest of the room. Well, let's look at the halacha. 2 basic, this is not the halacha, this is some background notes. But what is lavud? A halacha transmitted to Moshe from Sinai stating that two solid surfaces are considered connected if the gap between them is less than 3 handbreadths. This halacha is applicable with regard to the establishment of Shabbat boundaries and the construction of a sukkah, a ritual tabernacle that we Jews go sit in right after the holidays, or at the end of the holidays. It's called sukkah. It is one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, and we sit in makeshift booths outside in nature. It's a lot of fun. So, my first time my mother ever made a sukkah, we were kids, and her and her Jewish friends were making the sukkah outside. They didn't really know how to make a sukkah. They were just kind of weaving some canopy over a tree, and had no idea about walls, schmalls. I just heard you make a little hut somehow. And so they were doing this sukkah back in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and laughing and giggling and making their sukkah. First time my mother ever made a sukkah. It was the cutest and sweetest thing I'd ever seen. And my sister came out and started cracking up, laughing at them, going, "What is this, Jewish Gilligan's Island or something?" Yes, okay, so it's called Jewish Gilligan's Island. Whatever, if it's something new, when I grew up, it was something very new. Judaism was new to our family. My mother made tshuva and made a brilliant effort, and she was so wonderful that she would be lighting Shabbos candles, and all the kids would be laughing at her. We thought it was the craziest thing in the world, because I grew up in the People's Republic of Cambridge, where to be a religious person was like, if you were gay, or if you were perhaps a Obama supporter, or if you were an insurance salesman, or if you were let's say, a drug dealer or something like that, all these things were perfectly okay. But however, even honored. However, if you were a religious person, you were the biggest idiot in the world where I grew up. To any religion. A religious person was like, "You believe in that malarkey? You believe in that nonsense?" So my mother made the very brave move to b'makom she'en anashim liot ish, isha, in a place where there are no men, to be a man, in a place where there are no women, be a woman, meaning in a place where people are afraid to keep the Torah, you keep the Torah. As long as it doesn't put your life in danger. In other words, you're sitting around the table, everybody's Jewish, and nobody's going to say a word of Torah. So you say a word of Torah. It might not be the best word of Torah or not. You just you have the guts to do it. And hopefully it's not too long. So, unless it's interesting. So, that's a little window into my world here. But so the first sukkah I saw was it was like, that's Jewish Gilligan's Island. Okay, so that's lavud, is if the wall of the sukkah is less than 3 there's a space between the ground and the wall of the sukkah, but if it's less than 3 handbreadths, then it's still kosher. It's still considered a kosher wall. Less than 3, less than 10. 2 basic measurements are established here. Again, what the Rav Yosef asked, what is the halacha if the space under the bed is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 handbreadths? Is it a separate domain, or is it the same domain? So Rabbi Steinsaltz notes the 2 basic measurements are established here. A space of less than 3 handbreadths is considered as if it were connected. So any void smaller than this is not considered a separate domain with regard to practical demarcation of limits and boundaries. 10 handbreadths, however, establishes not only a significant separation, but a separate domain in and of itself. Since the beds were covered along the sides, anything less than 3 handbreadths is considered connected, while more than 10 handbreadths is considered a separate room. The beds were canopy beds. Now I have a clear picture of the Gemara. We're not talking about this kind of a bed, as you see. We're not talking about a regular bed filled with books and clothes and assorted old sandwiches. No. We're talking about one of those lovely canopy beds like Scarlett O'Hara. Yeah, Scarlett O'Hara's bed. Okay. That is canopied. It has a curtain around it. That's a separate domain. Okay, here we go. If we're lucky, we're going to finish this stuff in the next 2 hours. Here we go. No more stories about Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're going to zip through. He said to him, I don't know. Say, what about up to 9 hands breadths? Is that a separate domain? Rav Huna answered Rav Yosef back and said, I don't know. However, with regard to a space greater than 10 hand breadths, I certainly have no dilemma, as it is clear that the space is considered a separate domain. A canopied bed with a inner space of more than 10 hand breadths high or squared that is in fact a separate domain. Abaye, who happened to be sitting there in the Beis Midrash, says, my learned colleagues, you did well that you did not have a dilemma, as the halacha that any space 10 hand breadths high is a separate domain. So, Amar Rava, Hilchata b'chot mishlosha kilavu dame, asara rushuta acharitihi. Rava summarized the law and said, the halacha is that less than 3 hand breadths is considered connected, and it is permitted to recite Shema. So, if the chamber pot is behind the bed, where there's covered curtains around it, and it's less than 3 hand breadths, it's still considered connected. I think there's a mistake here. Well, I'll just read what he says. Rava summarized and said, the halacha is that less than 3 hand breadths is considered connected and is permitted to recite the Shema there. We said before that if it's lavud, less than 3 hand breadths to the ground, is as if the void beneath doesn't exist, and the halacha considers a void of less than 3 hand breadths as sealed. If it's over 10 hand breadths, it's clearly a separate domain. So it's as if you're not in the same room. If it's less than that, you may be in the same room. However, he says less than 3 hand breadths, it's sealed. It's as if it doesn't even exist. So Rava says 10 hand breadths is a separate domain. 3 to 10 hand breadths is a case Mishlosha ad asara hainu dva mine Rav Yosef me Rav Huna v'lo pashat le. 3 to 10 hand breadths is the case with regard to which Rav Yosef raised a dilemma before Rav Huna, and Rav Huna did not resolve it for him. V'lo pashat le. Amar Rav, halacha ka Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Rav said the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. V'chein amar Bali amar Rav Yaakov Bred Rav Shmuel. And so too the sage named Bali, I don't know if he was from Bali or the origin of his name, but it's an interesting name, Bali, with an aleph, not an ayin. V'chein amar Bali amar Rav Yaakov Bred Bat Shmuel. It says Bali said in the name of Yaakov, the son of the daughter of Shmuel, halacha k'Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, v'Rav Amar en halacha k'Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. The sage Bali said that Yaakov, son of Shmuel's daughter, said the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Remember, the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar was if the chamber pot is behind the bed, he recites Shema immediately. Before the bed, he distances himself 4 cubits. Unless you say that you reverse the opinions, and you say that, as we said before, that no, it's the house that it's any chamber pot in the house, even if it's 100 amas big, not in the house. They're talking about a room in the same room. Then if there's a door, obviously if it's in a different room with the door closed, it's not an issue, it's a separate domain. So the halacha is in accordance with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, according to Bavli. And Rava said the halacha, Amar Rava Amar, ein halacha ke Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. But Rava said the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Rav Achai Isak le livrei be Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta. The Gemara relates Rav Achai arranged for his son to marry into the family of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta. Aila lechupa v'lo hava mistaya milta. He led him to enter the wedding canopy for the wedding ceremony, but he was unsuccessful in his attempts to consummate the marriage. Azal batre de ayune. Azal batre la ayune. Rav Achai followed him to examine the possible causes of the problem. Chaza sefer Torah de manacha. He saw that a Torah scroll was placed there, apparently in the room in which the couple was intending to consummate the marriage. Iku hashta lo atai sakanata livri. He said to them, had I come not now, you would have endangered the life of my son. D'Tanya, Bayit sheyesh bo sefer Torah o tefillin asur l'shemesh bo et amita ad sheyotzi'em o sheyanichem kli toch kli. As it was taught in a Braita, apparently that somebody could die if he does such a thing. Someday, somewhere, he whose name may not be mentioned will take him out of the world, according to Rav Achai's opinion. It's very serious. One should not engage in sexual relations in a room that has tefillin or a Torah scroll or even holy books in it, unless the holy books are covered up or the tefillin is wrapped double. If it's possible to put the tefillin in another room that's not perfectly safe, you put it in them in another room. And all the more so a Sefer Torah, or just the same as a Sefer Torah. So, as it was taught in a Braita, a room in which there is a Torah scroll or phylacteries, it is forbidden to engage in conjugal relations until he takes them out of the room or places them in a vessel inside a second vessel. A box in a box. That's enough. The halacha states, one is prohibited from engaging in conjugal relations. That includes premarital relations, and that also includes extramarital relations. In fact, sexual relations of any kind, way, shape, or form are prohibited when there's a Torah scroll or tefillin in the room. Okay? Or other sacred objects or holy books until one covers them in one vessel inside another vessel. That's the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. We continue. Amar Abaye lo shanu ele bechli she'eno kilyan. Abaye said they only taught that the vessel inside the second vessel is sufficient when the vessel is not there, the Torah scroll or the phylactery's regular vessel. Aval bechli shehu kilyan afilu asara mane kachad manadame. Amar Rav, it has got to be a different box. It can't be the box you always keep the Torah scroll in, or the bag, or the satchel that you always have your tefillin in. If you have 10 satchels for tefillin, one inside the other, you could have 10 of them, and it's still, you could not make wind in the wave, as they say in Japan, lahavdil, with your wife. Okay? So, Rava said, Amar Rava, Glima akantra. Oh, mouth not working. Glima akantra. Kichli betoch kli dami. With a garment, a cloak, atop a chest is like a vessel within a vessel. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Sefer Torah tzarich la'asot lemechitza asara. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, one who wishes to engage in marital relations in a room in which there is a Torah scroll must erect a partition 10 handbreadths high. צריך לעשות לו מחיצה אסורה. מר זוטרה יקרא לבי רב אשי, חזר לדוכתא דמר בר רב אשי, דמנח בספר Torah va'avid le mechitza asara. Mar Zutra happened to come to the house of Rav Ashi, and he saw in the bed chamber of his son Mar bar Rav Ashi, there was a Torah scroll, and a partition of 10 handbreadths had been erected before it. Amar le, come on, could Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? Because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he said to his son, he said, Mar, Rav Ashi said to his son, hey Mar, you're going to according to the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. In my household, I'm not going to let anyone in my household go according to the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. If I catch you doing the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi anymore, I'm not going to take you to the base midrash tomorrow. You're going to have to walk. I'm not going to take you in the donkey. You can't use the donkey if you follow Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's opinion, because we go by a different opinion. Well, I doubt that the Rav Ashi was such a nerd, or nudgy father. I assume he was a cool father. He certainly was a cool sage. Okay, so what did he actually say? He asked his son, are you perhaps you're following the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? What did his son do again? He had a Torah scroll in his room, and there was a partition of 10 handbreadths high between his bed and the Torah scroll. Or in the room, Bechal, there was a partition. So what gives? You follow Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? Is that, I'm just curious. And his son, Deletz le beita acharina, said, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, you didn't understand his law. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi only has one little room. He doesn't have any other room. He doesn't have another, they could translate your house. But I think, in my humble opinion, with all due respect to Rav Steinsaltz and Rabbi Schreier, that I think, it's clearer if it would say room, if there was some note that we're talking, because it's a different room, it's not an issue. It's a separate domain. So, I guess that's perhaps clear. Any intelligent reader will figure that out on their own, just making sure. So, I Mar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi delet baita acharina, Mar ha'itle baita acharina. In those days, they wouldn't build. Okay, I understand, because in ancient times it wasn't the way we had with a house with many rooms. They'd have a house and a house and a house, and perhaps they'd make a corridor separating these modules. That was the way houses were built in Babylonia at the time. So that's why we say house. So I was too quick to criticize my masters and teachers. So, anyhow. Master, but don't you, Master, have another room? You, Mar? Or Rav Ashi says to his son, Mar? He says, Mar. Master. He calls his son Master. I love it. His father calls his son Master. My Master. It shows we should all respect our children. Enough to call them Master. If the greatest rabbi of all, Rav Ashi, the redactor of the Talmud, of the Gemara, he called his son Master, Mar. Either he wanted him to grow up to be a great man, and or he showed tremendous respect for his son to call him Mar. And on the other hand, you could say maybe his son, it was difficult to raise his son, and he was a little bitter. It's difficult to raise any son, but I don't want to go there, because Mar is a double entendre. It means master, it also means bitter. So, but in Aramaic it means most definitely master. Mar had itle beta charina, Mar le lav adatai. Mar said back to his father Rav Ashi, indeed, it didn't enter my mind. Thank you, I have such a great father, who's such a great sage, who can teach me the law. Kama yarchik mehenu min atzoa arba amot, amar Rava, amar Rav Sechora, amar Rav Huna, lo shanu ele lachorav, aval lefanav marchik molo enav, veken litfila. And how far must one distance himself from urine and feces in order to recite the Shema? 4 cubits. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Sechora. Said Rav Huna said, they only taught that it is sufficient to distance oneself 4 cubits when the feces are behind him, but if they are before him, he must distance himself to the point that is no longer within the range of vision, and the halacha is the same for prayer. I think we'd mentioned this halacha in the previous shir. Ini, is that really so? Ha'amar from Bar Papa, Amar Rav Chisda, Omed Adam Keneged Beta Kisei, Umitpalel, Hachabamayas Bebeta Kisei She'en Lo Tzoa. Is that so? Didn't Rav from Bar Papa say that Rav Chisda said that one may stand opposite a bathroom and pray? The Gemara resolves the contradiction. With what are we dealing with? With a bathroom that has no feces. And therefore there is no need to distance himself to that extent. So today, you can pray facing a bathroom, because usually, or you might want to check it first, but usually with a flush toilet, it's any kind of human waste is already in a different domain. So it's not considered like praying, sometimes you have a shul and you have a wall, and on the other wall is the bathroom, and you want to pray there. According to this Gemara, it's really not a problem. As long as it's not, you might want to check if you're super careful, but if there were feces in the bathroom at the time, maybe somebody's sitting on the toilet, okay, then there's a problem. But if you could ascertain that there's no feces in the bathroom at the time, there's no problem. We're even talking about a different room with a wall, a thick wall between them. There's still a problem praying against that wall if right on the other side of the wall there's feces. So I have a question about this. We just said that if you're in a room and you have a partition, that you could say Kriyat Shema in the room if the chamber pot's in a separate domain. So how could it be that you could pray facing the wall of a bathroom? You can't. If there was feces there, you couldn't. So these I don't have a resolution for this contradiction. This needs to be considered. Okay. Where are we? Ini. Amar Rav Yosef Bar Chanina, Beit HaKisei Shamru Afal Pi She'en Bo Tzoa, Beit HaMerchat Shamru Afal Pi She'en Bo Adam. Ela Hachabamaiskinan B'Chadati. The Gemara asks, is that so? Did Rav Yosef Bar Chanina say the bathroom to which the sages referred is in all the halachot of distancing oneself, even one in which there is no feces in the bathhouse to which the sages referred in all of the halachot of uttering sacred matters, was even one in which there was no naked person? Rather, with what are we dealing with here? We're dealing here with a failure to communicate. We're dealing with a new structure. Now it's communicated, but built as a bathroom, but not yet used for that purpose. There's no problem. If the bathroom had not been used, there's no problem davening before it. Amar Rava Hani Batekisai Defarsai Af Al Gav Deit Batzoa Kistumin Damu. Now we get to a modern application. Rava said, these Persian bathrooms, even though they contain feces, are considered sealed, as they are constructed on an incline, so the feces will roll out of the bathroom underground. Now, nowadays, we have water, so it's a whole different story. According to Halacha, Hani Bate Kisai de Farsai, the Persian bathrooms, a bathroom from which the excrement and the urine reaches a distance of 4 cubits by means of a pipe or canal, has the legal status of a sealed bathroom, and if there is no foul odor, one may recite Shema opposite it. So all bathrooms these days, most of them, if you can ascertain that your bathroom that's the law of a Persian bathroom, meaning again that the human waste reaches a distance of 4 cubits by means of a pipe or canal, going through the plumbing, and it's closed, and there's water. If there's no foul odor, one can stand opposite that bathroom, meaning with a wall between them, and say the Shema. Otherwise, one may not. Time for the Mishnah, and with that, we're going to stop. We're going to be finishing the 3rd chapter now. Rav Shara'a Kari, the Nida, Zav Shara'a Kari, the Nida Shapalta Shichvat Zera, V'Mashameshet Sharata Nida, Srichin Litfila, Zav Shara'a Kari. Continuing the earlier discussion of the halachot of immersion for Torah study and prayer for one who has experienced a seminal emission, the Mishnah discusses a case where individuals who are already impure with a severe form of ritual impurity and exposed to the impurity of a seminal emission as well, they are required to immerse themselves and purify themselves of the impurity of the seminal emission, even though they remain impure due to more severe impurity. Consequently, even a zav, whose impurity lasts 7 days, that would today roughly the equivalent of a gonorrheal emission, or as I said before, if a man sees an emission from his penis with not based on any arousal from a woman, that's called a zav. And the zav, his status of a zav, he's impure for 7 days, and then he has to immerse himself in flowing spring water, and then he has to offer a sacrifice in the temple to complete his purification process. So a zav who experienced a zav who had a seminal emission, he's already a zav, and then he has a seminal emission, for which he is not a zav, and would be impure only for 1 day. Okay, and then that's one case. Other case is nida shepalta shichvat zera, a menstruating woman who discharged semen, despite the fact that she is already impure with a severe impurity, unaffected by her immersion. So a woman who's a nida, she's experienced her monthly bleeding, and she had let's say before she saw the blood, less than 3 days before she saw the blood, she had relations with her husband, and eventually she is going to discharge the semen. So out of the 6 million sperm cells, only one of them is going to reach the egg. So you got all the others. What are they going to do? They're going to be discharged. That renders a woman impure from Keri. Keri is seminal emission. So let's say she was a menstruating woman, and she had relations with it less than 3 days before the onset of blood, and then she had a discharge of the semen after she started menstruating. So she has both the impurity from the blood, from this menstruation, and she has the impurity from the semen. So, and in a third case, Isha the third case is nida tzricha tvila. Tzrichi in all 3 cases require ritual immersion. But Rabbi Yehuda poter, and Rabbi Yehuda exempts them from ritual immersion. That's a very short Gemara to continue today's class. Ibayalahu bal keri shira'a ziva l'Rabbi Yehuda mahu. A dilemma was raised before the students of the yeshiva. One who experienced a seminal emission was therefore required to immerse himself, who later saw a discharge that rendered him a zav. In other words, he's a simple bal keri, and then afterwards he had a discharge that was not a keri, it was a zav discharge. It might have been associated with pain. It was certainly not associated with sexual arousal. So, Rabbi Yehuda mahu, what? According to Rabbi Yehuda, what is his legal status? Ki patar Rabbi Yehuda hatam bezav shara keri, de meikara lav bar tvilahu. Aval bal keri shara ziva, de meikara bar tvilahu, mechayev, o dilma lo shna. This is the complicated question at hand. When, in our Mishnah, again, he's got a seminal emission, and afterwards he has a zav emission. Rabbi Yehuda says, what's his status? Rabbi Yehuda exempted a zav who saw a seminal emission. We just said at the end of our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda exempts a zav who sees a seminal emission from immersion. The opposite, not as someone who had a seminal emission who later saw a zav. So our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda patered, he exempted the opposite case. But so in this case, what would the law be? Would it be exempt or not? Rabbi Yehuda exempted a zav who saw a seminal emission of immersion. That was because from the outset he was not fit for immersion, as the immersion would not be effective in purifying himself from the impurity of a zav. In other words, he can't go to once he becomes a zav, once he experiences the gonorrhea, or whatever you want to call it, the zav, he cannot go he has to count 7 clean days. He has to examine himself 7 days, make sure there's no discharge. If that's after the 7 days, he is fit for immersion. If within those 7 days he has a keri, a normal seminal emission, then got to get the emissions checked. What is this? The Department of Motor Vehicles here? Okay, so you can't go to the mikveh until after 7 days if he's a zav, and he has to have checked every day. So he has a carry. It's not going to make say, oh, I go to. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you don't just go to the mikveh for the carry in the middle. You're still a zav. You can't go to the mikveh. However, one who experienced a seminal emission, who later saw a discharge, he had a wet dream or something like that, and then or he had relations with his wife, or any normal seminal emission, and later he saw a discharge that was a zav. Oy vey, he contracted something. He was fit for immersion when he was a Balkari, and only later he got a more severe level of impurity called zav. In that case, would Rabbi Yehuda require immersion, or perhaps there's no difference? So Rabbi Yehuda is not around. These are the sages in the yeshiva of later generations trying to figure out what Rabbi Yehuda might have said. Tashma, we're going to try to resolve the dilemma through arguments. Tashma hamashameshet v'rata nidat tzricha tefila. Come in here, the last case of the Mishnah. A woman who engaged in conjugal relations with her husband and later saw menstrual blood requires immersion. Rabbi Yehuda poter, and Rabbi Yehuda exempts them from immersion. Vaha meshameshet v'rata nidat kaval keri shira ziva damya. Rabbi Yehuda exempts from immersion. Isn't the woman who engaged in conjugal relations with her husband and later saw menstrual blood like the one who experienced a seminal emission? Who later saw a discharge? So we can compare it. The woman had relations with her husband. Eventually she's going to have the impurity of the seminal emission that she's carrying for 3 days. After 3 days, she's not going to be impure from it because it disintegrates. There's no more impurity. The impurity would last for 3 days because she may discharge the semen any time the excess semen any time in those 3 days. And so later, after she had relations, she became a nida. She saw menstrual blood. Isn't that the same case? And in that case, Rabbi Yehuda exempts the woman from immersion? Isn't the woman who engaged in conjugal relations with her husband and saw menstrual blood like the one who experienced a seminal emission? Who later saw a discharge and rendered him a zav? Shouldn't it be the same law that requiring immersion? Rabbi Yehuda required immersion in the case of the woman, so he should require immersion in the same case of the man. Like the person who had the carry and then became the zav. As in both cases, there's a less severe ritual impurity followed by a more severe level of ritual impurity. The less severe one is carry, seminal emission, and the more severe ones are nida and zav. And nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda exempts. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda says no. In that case, she does not have to go to the mikveh. Woman, she has relations, and then afterwards she becomes a nida. Within the time that she could still have a discharge of the seminal emission, then Rabbi Yehuda says no, she doesn't have to go to the mikveh. So that should be the same case as a man who had a seminal emission and then later became a zav. So he shouldn't also not have to go to the mikveh, just like the woman. Shmamina tani Rabbi Chia Borei v'kapata Rabbi Yehuda shmamina. Conclude from this. Shmamina tani Rabbi Chia Behedya. Rabbi Chia taught explicitly. Bal kerish ra'aziva tzarik tvila Rabbi Yehuda poter. Rabbi Yehuda conclude from this that Rabbi Yehuda does not distinguish between the cases. They are in fact the same procedure. And indeed, Rabbi Chia explicitly taught one who experienced a seminal emission who later saw a discharge that rendered him a zav requires immersion, and Rabbi Yehuda exempts. Hadran alach mi shemetu. We have finished chapter 3. Well, I didn't, but some of you did. And in the next class, Mirz Hashem, Bli neder, we're going on to chapter 4. Be well.